Thank you for joining us today. We wanted to start today's forum by acknowledging that the land on which we are all sitting right now was taken from the original residents of Michigan, often through deceptive or violent means. We collectively acknowledge that the state of Michigan encompasses the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary land of the Anishinaabe, Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi people. Virtually the entire state was ceded from Indigenous nations in a series of treaties, beginning with the Treaty of Greenville in 1795, which encompassed the Detroit area, and ending with the Treaty of La Pointe in 1842, involving land in the Upper Peninsula. We at the Michigan League for Public Policy recognize, support, and advocate for the sovereignty of Michigan's 12 federally recognized Indian nations: Bay Mills Chippewa Indian Community, Grand Traverse Bay Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians, Hannahville Potawatomi Indian Community, Keweenaw Bay Indian Community, Lackview Desert Band of Lake Superior Chippewa Indians, Little River Band of Ottawa Indians, Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa Indians, Matchibee-Nashi-Wish Band of Potawatomi Indians in Michigan, the Nottawasapi Huron Band of the Potawatomi Indians, the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi Indians, Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe, Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians, as well as those communities working to gain federal recognition and historic Indigenous status in Michigan. The reason we do this is because Indigenous individuals and communities are here now and are active, vibrant members in our communities, despite the many horrific, genocidal policies imposed by the state and federal government, including violent displacement from their homelands, being stolen from their families, religious persecution, and treaties that were left unfulfilled. We want to honor them and commit ourselves to continuing to recognize and learn their story, bearing in mind that our duty to support Indigenous communities is not fulfilled with a single land acknowledgement or hour-long learning session. We must go further to stand in solidarity with Native people and the sovereign nations of which they are citizens. We must amplify the voices of Indigenous people and support Indigenous-led movements to counter colonialism through restorative and just policy change. We hope that you will join us in this, and we thank you for listening and taking a moment to honor our Indigenous nations. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Charles Ballard, and I'm the chair of the board of directors of the Michigan League for Public Policy. It's my pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon to our annual forum. We will get to the program very shortly, but first I wanted to take this opportunity to tell you a few things about our organization. We're all here today because we understand that people must be at the center of policy work. And until we have full economic and racial justice for all of Michigan's people, we cannot come close to achieving our full potential as a state. Since 1912, the League has worked to promote and strengthen the fabric of our state by promoting investments in people. The League fights for economic opportunity for all people and works to lift up those who historically have not had a seat at the table when it comes to public policy decisions in Michigan. People with low incomes, people of color, people with disabilities, those involved with the justice system, immigrants, and more. Because in a stronger Michigan, everyone has a seat at the table. For the last decade, Gilda Z. Jacobs has worked tirelessly and has been instrumental in building a stronger, a better, a bigger table at the League, a table where everyone is heard. As president and CEO, Gilda has helped to ensure that community voice, racial justice, and economic justice are at the center of everything that we do. Under her leadership, the League has grown in size, scope, and influence, and has cemented its status as the go-to organization for high-quality research and advocacy. Earlier this year, Gilda announced her retirement, and today I want to thank her from the bottom of my heart on behalf of all of the members of the board, past and present, and truly on behalf of all of Michigan's people. Her decades of service as a teacher, a legislator, and a thought influencer and thought leader have had a profoundly positive effect on the people of our state. And the work that she has done will continue to impact Michigan's people in a positive way for generations to come. So please now join me in congratulating Gilda on a remarkable career. Although we can't be here in person today, I hope you will welcome her now with hearty applause. Thank you, Gilda, for all that you have done here at the League.
I'm not supposed to cry, so I'm not going to cry, but I really appreciate that really warm, personal, heartfelt introduction. And I've just enjoyed working with you so much and so closely over the years. I can't tell you what a great honor it's been to serve as the League's president and CEO and to watch our organization evolve as we continue the tradition of serving Michigan's families, children, workers, and communities. Since our last forum, the League has been able to celebrate many wins for Michiganders. So hold on. I'm going to run through kind of a quick and dirty but fabulous list. The establishment of the Healthy Moms, Healthy Babies initiative, which will provide Medicaid coverage for 12 months postpartum, expand home visiting, and increase access to behavioral health care. An increase in the income threshold for child care assistance from 130% of poverty to 150%, which will make child care more accessible to families with low wages. Funding for Michigan Reconnect, which will provide state financial aid for students 25 years and over. Funding for 10 cents a meal, which will encourage healthy foods for students and children in childcare. Funding to cover the growing need for Medicaid in the Healthy Michigan Plan as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Continued funding to respond to the drinking water emergency in Flint. For decades, the League and advocacy partners have fought to help returning citizens thrive and to stop the criminalization of poverty. In the last year, we saw some major and refreshingly bipartisan improvements, including ending the lifetime ban on food assistance for residents with certain drug convictions, reducing the overuse of driver's license suspensions for offenses not related to dangerous driving, improving access to occupational licenses and better career opportunities for individuals with a criminal record, making it easier to keep juvenile records confidential and to get a juvenile record expunged, expanding, simplifying, and automating the state's criminal record expungement process, eliminating jail sentences for a variety of minor offenses. So this work is always important, but it's even more urgent since the COVID-19 pandemic hit. The League has worked hard to advocate for policy needs at the state and federal level to address the impact of COVID-19, including expanding unemployment assistance, creating an eviction moratorium, and, as we're prepared to do today, advocating for more federal funding to support childcare, education, frontline worker protections, and more. Today's forum will focus on the importance of an equitable recovery for Michigan, and we are so honored to welcome an incredible group of experts who will lead our conversation. Joining us today will be keynote speaker Janelle Jones, Chief Economist for the United States Department of Labor. Our panel discussion will be moderated by League Board member Sheila Clay and will feature Meredith Kennedy, a tribal citizen and member of Think Babies Michigan, Madiha Tariq of Access Community Health Services, and Kim Trent of the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. I've had a chance to meet with our speakers, and I can tell you that we are in for an insightful and engaging program today. Now, before we move on with the program, I just have a few housekeeping notes for you. Firstly, an agenda can be found in the comment section of today's live stream. Janelle Jones and our panelists will be answering audience questions. You can submit your questions in two ways. You may email questions to info@mlpp.org, or you may text Ask MLPP to 63566. That's texting to Ask MLPP to 63566. Our team will be on hand behind the scenes to field questions, and we will attempt to answer as many as possible, time permitting. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank our many sponsors and donors for making today's event possible. We are so grateful to the many corporations and foundations for their commitment to our work, including our champion sponsor, Huntington Bank, and our guardian sponsors, the Max M. and Marjorie S. Fisher Foundation, Michigan Community Action, the Michigan Regional Council of Carpenters, Jennifer R. Poteet, and Rock Ventures. And we are especially grateful to the dozens of individuals who contributed to the League through the registration process. Being a nonprofit going up against political establishment and wealthy special interests, we are so fortunate to have the support of so many of you. And last but certainly not least, I would like to thank past CEOs Ann Marsden and Sharon Parks for their tireless dedication to the League. Pat Sorensen, Senior Policy Analyst, for her decades of work on early childhood issues. She just retired recently. Tilly Kuharek for her many years of service at the League. She also retired this year. And I will look to all of these women as I prepare for my own retirement later on this year. Although my career with the League is coming to a close, I remain committed to our mission. I am confident that the League will continue to be the trusted voice on the issues that matter most to Michiganders. And we are excited to formally announce today that we will build on our strength and success in influencing public policy at the state and federal level with a new leader at the helm. And I'm thrilled to be able to introduce you to our new president and CEO, Monique Stanton. Monique is a passionate and dynamic leader with a wealth of experience in the nonprofit sector, promoting social justice and advancing racial equity to improve the lives of Michiganders. Please join me in welcoming Monique Stanton today. Monique?
Thank you so much, Gilda. So thank you to Gilda, to our attendees, our board, and to our staff for their hard work in putting together the forum. It is an honor to lead such a valuable organization, to be able to work with and learn from Gilda Jacobs and the deeply committed and knowledgeable team here at the Michigan League for Public Policy. Throughout my career, I've seen the importance of connecting with people on a personal human level, and I look forward to continuing that work on an even greater scale at the League. In my past work in human services and behavioral health care, I learned that in order to address racial injustice and economic inequality, we need strong public policy and systematic change to create a better world for individuals and families. I am honored for the opportunity to continue this critical work at the League. As Charlie Ballard mentioned, the League has a deep history of making a difference in our state and in people's lives. Over the decades, Michigan has made great progress in so many areas of well-being, but we know that some deep structural changes need to take place in order for us to see true progress when it comes to kids and families. COVID-19 underscored the systematic weakness that holds back so many in our country, but widespread economic insecurity predates the pandemic. Over a 3-year period before the pandemic, more than 1 in 3 American households with children struggled to afford adequate food, shelter, or utilities. Among Black and Latinx households with children, roughly 1 in 2 reported one of these hardships. These problems faced by American families have been greatly exacerbated by the economic downturn caused by the global pandemic. Today, we're here to see how we can shape a new future for Michigan, a future built on the belief that Michiganders can live in a vibrant, inclusive state where they and their families feel safe, healthy, and welcome. And with federal and state investments, we can not only recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, we can combat structural racism and create an inclusive economic transformation. Here today to help us delve into these topics is our keynote speaker. I'm delighted to introduce to you Janelle Jones, the Chief Economist for the United States Department of Labor. Janelle's background in economic justice will be vital in helping guide today's discussion. Janelle helped launch and build Groundwork Collaborative, a policy organization that works to advance an economic vision and deliver meaningful opportunity and prosperity for all. She also served as an analyst at the Economic Policy Institute, working on a variety of labor market topics relating to race, ethnicity, and the economy. Prior to that, Janelle worked as a research associate at the Center for Economic Policy Research and the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Her work has focused on labor markets, racial inequities, unemployment, and job quality. Her research has been cited in The New Yorker, The Economist, Harper's, The Washington Post, and the Review of Black Political Economy, and many other publications. In her role at the Department of Labor, Janelle faces the task of addressing historic economic disparities, in particular for communities of color, that have become even more starker during the pandemic. This is a critical time for our nation and for our state, and Janelle has been pushing hard to make sure recovery efforts reach everyone. Today, she has graciously offered to share with us a vision for an equitable economic future. Please join me in welcoming Janelle Jones.
Hi all, good afternoon. The welcomes on Zoom are always so weird because we can't really interact. Thank you, Monique. Thank you, Gilda, for the invitation, and to the Michigan League for Public Policy for having me. I am so excited to be able to join you virtually to talk about what we're doing at the Department of Labor to make sure that this recovery we continue to navigate is delivering results for working people in Michigan and around the country. As the Chief Economist at the Department of Labor, my focus has been on advising Secretary Walsh on the ways to ensure that the Biden-Harris worker-centered agenda is inclusive and leaves no community behind. As Secretary Walsh has said, the mission of the Department of Labor is to empower all workers. This means we will act boldly to put the full force of the department's people and powers to work for American workers, both on and off the job. So what do workers need? They need to know they have a good job to go to, and they need their care needs met, both childcare and elder care. This is crucial infrastructure needed so workers can thrive in their jobs. This means we will build an economy that values care workers. We will fight for workers while they are on the job to make sure they are protected from wage theft and work in healthy and safe conditions. And we will fight for workers when their shift is over, for security and retirement, workers' compensation when injured on the job, and a safety net when they are unemployed through no fault of their own. We won't stop until we build a modern, inclusive workforce where workers have good opportunities, good jobs, and seats at the table. The overall employment trend since President Biden's inauguration has been good. It's actually been historic. We've added 4.7 million jobs to the economy, including an average of 550,000 jobs per month over the past 3 months. And wages are going up because workers have more power. Yet I remain focused on the areas where our recovery can continue to expand. And one of those areas includes the essential workers who helped all of us weather this pandemic. I, for one, would not have made it in the past year and a half without the millions of workers across so many industries who left their homes and went to work instead of being safely on Zoom, as many of us were able to do. Many of these workers were already coping with low wages and tenuous conditions of employment. And they work in industries where workers of color are overrepresented. They are women, Black, Latino, and Asian American and Pacific Islander workers who have historically been the last to see the benefits of a recovery. So we are not going to make the mistake of declaring economic hardship to be over simply because they are working, especially after what they did for the rest of us over the past 18 months. The Black unemployment rate remains elevated at 7.9%. Remember, when this is the national headline unemployment rate, it is a crisis level of joblessness. On its face, September gave us good news on the Black unemployment rate. It fell almost a full percentage point from 8.8% in August. But only about half of that drop was a result in Black workers connecting with employment, with the other half due to workers leaving the labor force altogether. This is not success. Under the Biden-Harris administration, the Labor Department is taking a hard look at the issues that affect these communities, reviewing our own policies and charting a path toward equity. This review was mandated by President Biden's executive order on advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government. A mouthful, but very important. The president's executive order mandates us to assess how well we are advancing equity and improving the well-being of populations who have faced discrimination, exclusion, and marginalization. I'm leading that review with my colleague, Alex Hertel-Fernandez. We're trying to ask how we're reaching the most vulnerable workers and what we can be doing better. We are committed to assessing how DOL reaches these populations in all the roles that we hold, as an employer ourselves, through our grants, through our training programs, and through the benefits and protections we provide to workers. Questions of equity and inclusion have an uneven legacy at the Department of Labor. On the one hand, landmark labor programs like unemployment insurance, federal minimum wage, federal overtime protections have boosted working conditions and labor standards for generations of workers. Yet all too frequently, women, workers of color, and women of color, especially Black and brown women, were written out of these programs' promises of a good job and a good life. Take the example of unemployment insurance, which has provided an important lifeline to millions of workers and their families, as well as a boost to the economy throughout the pandemic. Despite its importance, the program was out of reach for many workers, especially Black, brown, and Asian workers, and workers with lower levels of formal education. Recent research suggests that through the pandemic, about a quarter of unemployed white workers reported receiving unemployment insurance benefits, compared to just 13% of unemployed Black workers. In a similar vein, just 12% of unemployed workers with a high school degree or less reported receiving benefits, compared to nearly a third of workers with a college degree. That tells us that we have more work to do to eliminate racial disparities from the administration of our programs. This review is a big task and one that is still ongoing. As we all know, embedding equity into all we do cannot be done overnight or in the 280 days I think I've been on the job so far. But we already have examples of how we are redirecting Labor Department resources to advance economic opportunity and protections for the most disadvantaged populations. It's no easy task to revisit the policies of a department as large as ours to find ways that our work has led to disparate outcomes. And we are counting on our internal team at DOL and many experts outside of DOL, like the researchers that you all support, to help us build data and evidence we need to empower all workers, but especially those who have been and continue to be excluded from the gains of our economy. When we raise standards for the most disadvantaged workers, everyone benefits. And we will see this work through. And I expect that it will lead to important changes that expand the promise of those earlier programs to communities that have not until now benefited equally from them. Take again the example of unemployment insurance. This is one where we're already taking action. Among other interventions to help reinforce a program that saw a tremendous strain, we're devoting significant resources to solving these equity disparities in state UI programs. We've awarded $260 million in equity grants to state UI systems, a first of its kind undertaking for the department. These funds aim to improve outreach and customer service with an eye towards addressing potential ethnic and racial disparities. We're making similar investments in registered apprenticeship programs, awarding more than $99 million in state apprenticeship, expansion, equity, and innovation grants to bolster states' efforts to expand programming and inclusive recruitment strategies to attract a diverse workforce. This equity frame applies to all of the department's work, and that work would get a huge boost from the president's Build Back Better agenda. The legislation that members of Congress are, at this very second, working so hard to pass is transformative investment in our people and our workers, and elements of it are essential to the inclusive recovery we're seeking. For one, the Build Back Better agenda calls for a historic investment in workforce development. This investment orients our nationwide job training systems around supporting and growing good jobs in critical industry sectors. The president and the secretary are committed to making sure that all of the other goals to rebuild America, including combating climate change and making infrastructure investments in roads, bridges, broadband, care, clean energy, and more, are also opportunities to create good jobs in the communities and for the workers that need them the most. Build Back Better investments will cut costs of childcare for most American families. We know that childcare is one of the obstacles to our full recovery, and that is especially true for our most essential workers and women in particular. The simple reality is we cannot get to full employment and an inclusive recovery if millions of families have to make the choice between caregiving responsibilities and going to work. The Build Back Better agenda also aims to create a national comprehensive paid family and medical leave program. This is a crucial support for essential workers, for women, for folks with disabilities, and other marginalized workers, and again, for achieving an inclusive recovery. I can also talk briefly about some of the things the Labor Department is doing through regulation to ensure that workers and families are getting a fair bargain for their contributions to our economy. I wouldn't usually include this, but I think we have a good group of policy wonks here who will be pretty excited about our regulatory agenda. First up, misclassification. Misclassified employees are often denied access to critical benefits and protections like overtime, minimum wage, paid leave, unemployment insurance, and safe workplaces. It cheats every taxpayer. It undermines the entire economy. Minors, migrant and seasonal laborers, immigrants with limited English proficiency, and vulnerable workers are subject to disparate treatment and wages because they are afraid of retaliation if they exercise their workplace rights. It's simply a myth that the only way to offer flexibility is by converting workers to independent contractor status. Unpredictable schedules often mean unpredictable income and the inability to plan for childcare, for school, or for a second job. This wreaks havoc on the lives of workers, and those flexibilities can all be accomplished within the employer-employee relationship. If there's one thing the past year and a half have shown us, it's that employers can be flexible when forced. Because of that, we withdrew a 2020 regulation in order to maintain the department's long-standing analysis of whether a worker is an employee or an independent contractor. We have also proposed to rescind the joint employer final rule to ensure more workers receive minimum wage and overtime protections of the Fair Labor Standards Act. We've issued guidance to implement the American Rescue Plan's continuation of healthcare coverage premium assistance under COBRA. That's for certain workers who have experienced a reduction in hours or involuntary termination of employment during the coronavirus pandemic, something we know that was very much widespread. We've also proposed a rule to limit the amount of non-tip producing work that a tipped employee can perform when an employer is taking a tip credit. And in response to the executive order on increasing the minimum wage for federal contractors, the department has proposed a rule that will increase the hourly minimum wage under federal contracts to $15. This could affect more than 300,000 contract workers in the first year alone. Secretary Walsh is also committed to strengthening the engines of better pay, better benefits, more equity, and safer workplaces known as unions. As a vice chair of Vice President Harris's task force on worker organizing and empowerment, Secretary Walsh sees the future of work as one without barriers to organizing and bargaining collectively. This is another area where legislation is super important. The gap between the number of workers who say they want union representation and current levels of union membership indicates the need for labor law reform. Workers just are not getting the representation they want. Decline in union membership also coincides with decline in the middle class. The Protecting the Right to Organize Act, or the PRO Act as our friends call it, would give more workers the opportunity to have the voice they want on the job, and this is especially true for workers of color. It increases the penalties that businesses face for breaking the law, promotes safe, free, and fair union elections, and empowers workers to exercise their right to organize. We're doing what we can as an executive agency, working to mobilize the federal government's policies, programs, and practices to increase worker power, especially for workers of color and those in areas of the country with restrictive labor laws. So much of my family in Northeast Ohio were brought up in households with union auto manufacturing jobs, and I don't have to tell a Michigan audience that what that means and how big a difference it makes to getting into and staying in the middle class. So it's especially important to me that we make sure we're providing those opportunities to young families today and ensuring that those jobs remain strong and secure and build a foundation for future generations. I love being an Ohioan, and I believe that the Midwest is a wellspring of innovation and talent that, like it always has, will be central to solving some of the major challenges this country faces, like inequality and climate change. All of us at the Labor Department are working to realize the generational shift that this moment asks of us, one that leads to a more equitable and more just economy and society. It's important for our recovery, and it's essential to building back better. Thank you so much for this time. And I think that's going to be enough of me rambling on, and I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone and taking some questions.
Thank you, Janelle. That was amazing. We know this, but then we don't know this, and hearing this from you again is really, really important. So thank you. We are going to wait for some questions. On everybody's screen is the email address or how to text with questions. I think on everybody's screen, but just in case it's not, it's info@mlpp.org or text Ask MLPP to 63566. So, Janelle, while we're waiting, I'm going to kind of ask you a question, something that we hear some people say about stopping the $300 that was going in terms of assistance to extra $300 that was going to assistance to some folks because it was keeping them or incentivizing them to not go back to work. And there have been some studies out recently that I just was reading about that has not proved that at all to be true. Yet this was sort of a conversation that some conservative legislators in various states were bringing up. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, I think even at the beginning of the summer when we knew we might be getting rid of benefits, we started looking at this very closely. And even early research showed that there wasn't really strong evidence that showed that was the case. And, we've had this natural experiment over the past couple of months to indicate whether or not it really is keeping workers back. And you're right. We've seen that it's not the case at all. Great work from academics like Aaron Sir-Joyner and Aaron Dubé, who I'm sure, this audience is very familiar with, has put out a ton of research showing that it was not those benefits that were keeping people from going back to work. Something that we've been really harping on here at the Department of Labor, also with our White House colleagues, is, we are not going to have an economic recovery until we also have a recovery from the pandemic. We're still seeing shocking numbers of people who are getting sick and dying from this disease every day. And we know that workers are still very scared, particularly those workers who interact with customers who are in service-facing occupations. And it's just, it's a calculus that I wish workers didn't have to make, but it's still one that very much is with us. And so I think, the extra money is one thing, but the risk to your health, the health of your family, particularly if you have young children who are not vaccinated, is still very much, keeping workers from thinking about whether or not they want to make that risk. And some workers are saying no.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So one of the things that you brought up was, here we have our first question via text. How would the federal efforts to improve access to unions roll out in our right to work state? Would it override it?
That is a good question. I will leave that to the lawyers to decide. I think our role right now, and we are, working with the White House on Vice President Harris's task force for union organizing. And I think this is something that we're thinking about is, I think there is a world in which you could have federal labor law reform that may impact, thinking of, some of the laws that preemption has stayed in numerous states. And so I think, that's one thing that we're looking at in terms of, what labor law reform could do and what it could provide through the PRO Act, perhaps. I think another way that we're looking at this is, the Secretary Walsh is thinking and meeting carefully with stakeholders, with workers, with business to think about ways that we can, convince people, kind of use the messages and the data and the evidence that we have that unions are good, not just for workers, but also for business. And so I think, we are definitely pulling at every single lever. And I think the issue of overriding right to work states is definitely, something we're thinking about that we would need legislation.
Thank you. Also by text, what will be the most difficult parts of achieving some of the priorities that you outlined?
It's all really hard, right? That's a good question, though, to prioritize what is the actual hardest part. I think we are trying to do something in this administration under the leadership of President Biden and Secretary Walsh. Like, we are trying to do something we have not done ever. We are trying to orient all of the power and policies and programs of the federal government to think about equity. Not only is that something that we have never done, there's a history of us actually doing the exact opposite. So it's not actually like we're starting from a blank slate and we can, rewrite the laws as we see them. We actually have to undo some of the harm that we know has been in communities, particularly communities of color, for generations, and then thinking about ways to take that and redo it and really think about, what are some of the programs that we know we can restructure so that we think about equity a little bit more. And so I think, this is probably not a good answer, but it's all really hard. It's all really difficult. But I think, I think there's hard parts all along the way, right? I think it's taking a workforce to rethink how we think about equity. It's looking at all of the things that we already have on the book. It's thinking, creatively and expansively about what it means to do things differently. I've been in federal government for less than a year, and something that makes me really excited is the partnerships that we have with stakeholders outside of the government. Because I think, it is, lots of folks on this call, it is their life work and thinking about how you can make apprenticeships more equitable, how we can make procurement more equitable. And so bringing all of those resources to bear, I think is something that we're trying to do. And then, we also want to make sure that we're not doing unintended harm, right? One of the things that we want to make sure we do is we don't write out a law that, because we weren't thinking specifically of low-income Black women, or we weren't thinking of Indigenous women with disabilities, that they are somehow left out of the protections we're providing to more workers. And so I think, we're thinking about how to do all of that. And I think it's really hard all the way around, but I think that we are committed to it. I think we are honest with the things that we have not done well and trying to just be intentional and strategic and moving that ball forward. But a bad answer is it's all really hard, but it's all really worth it. So I'm glad we're undertaking the job.
Yeah. And I think often we have to undo the harm that's been done by other policies and regulations and laws. So I appreciate you raising that as well. So if you were going to reform a UI system to make it more equitable, what do you think we need to do? What needs to be in this soup?
In the soup. That's a good way to describe it. Cause yeah, I think there's probably a lot of moving parts. And then there's like the state system is maybe like the broth or something. But yeah, I think there's a few things. And, I'm super excited that I'm sure this group knows an actual Michigander, Angela Hanks, is now the Principal Assistant Secretary for ETA. So we have someone from Michigan who's thinking, very deeply about this. I think one is, we have a lack of data around who gets UI and why folks are rejected from getting benefits. And that's something that Alex and I are really thinking closely about. It is extremely hard to measure and solve a problem unless we have accurate data on who it's affecting. The really great work of my colleague here at Labor, Michelle Evermore, has spent, just years and years digging into this data to realize that we are missing a lot of the demographic data. If we want to say, if we want to look at workers from a particular state who identify as LGBTQ or who are a person of color, we often don't have that data. And so I think one is just figuring out the scale of the problem. It's really hard to design something if you really don't know the contours of what we're doing. So I think one is really thinking about, getting the data, getting the evidence to make sure we're making good solutions. And then the second, which I mentioned before, is really talking to folks in the field. We inside DOL have just, people who are just so passionate and so committed to the work. But we also know that there are folks on the ground who have ideas about how to reform UI, who have policy papers, who have done the work. And so I think connecting that as well. And one of the things that we're really trying to do that we saw at the beginning of the pandemic is give folks technical assistance and resources. I mean, some of the horror stories of just the programs that folks were using, the software that the programs were running on, it just isn't prepared. And so I think this is an opportunity to really think about UI. It's not just being something that we bolster during a time of intense emergency when everything else is going haywire, but it's a program that actually is sufficiently resourced and staffed and available throughout so that it is actually ready to help workers when they really do need it. So I think those are just a few things in the soup, but there are definitely others, and happy to talk more about that and hear from folks who have been doing that work and thinking about that.
Thank you. So a kind of a connected question: how will states be held accountable for working to improve outreach and equity when the states are receiving federal allocations from the $260 million for unemployment insurance, or is it? It must be million. Okay.
Oh yeah, I don't think it is billion. I could check.
That's right. I had to stop. Right.
I think you were probably right that it is billion. So these are the equity grants that ETA is rolling out. And so we are working and setting up an office, I think an office that will look at holding states accountable. I know that we are, putting some internal resources and making sure that we are connecting with states, that there are accountability measures in place. But that is a very specific question that I do not on the top of my head have the answer to, but I can definitely find out, because I know that there are tons of folks in ETA who are thinking closely about that. And we do want to make sure that, we are using these resources to meet the goals. We want UI to be sustainable. We want it to be fully resourced. We want it to be equitable. I think the pandemic has shown a lot of, room. I mean, it's a program that has literally saved millions of workers and their families, but we know that there's also a lot of work to be done. So we are definitely thinking about how to do that. I think, maybe some of those conversations are still taking place. And so happy to talk more about that with the folks who are involved in making sure that happens.
Great. Just want to remind folks that they can email questions to info@mlpp.org, or they can text Ask MLPP to 63566. Another question. Currently, the current population survey shows that the number of individuals who are out of the labor force who currently want a job but can't due to childcare, family responsibilities, or transport. How would the currently debated social spending bill address these issues? Oh, wait, there's something else. It's severed for $1 billion for several months. 60% of that group are women with less than a BA degree. And I think you spoke to this a little bit in your remarks. And I guess the other part I would like you to address when you answered this is the concern, okay, there's money that may be out there for the next 3 years. Obviously, COVID has shined a light on how important childcare is to getting people back to work. What's our long-term goal here in terms of making sure that those funds are available in perpetuity to make sure people can work?
Yeah, that is a good question. Taking the first part about the workers who are still not in the labor force because of these other issues. I mean, you're right. Like we are not done with the recovery. Like we have not recovered as long as there are, 1 million workers who are still not coming back to work because of these sorts of issues. And so I think care is definitely one. The secretary has really, he has spent time with home health care aides, with child care providers, hearing about what they need to go back to work. I think, the Build Back Better agenda has investments in care workers as small businesses, and raising wages for folks who provide care. So I think that that's definitely, there is language, there is money in the agenda to make sure that we are distributing that money to the folks who need it. I think that, something we're trying to do is provide supports to workers to make sure that they can get back to work. She also mentioned transport as one of the issues. There are investments to invest in, not just care infrastructure. I remember seeing like all of the tweets, is care infrastructure? I think we know that it is. We really, really need it. But in traditional infrastructure, there is money to make sure that we are investing in the transport that workers need to get back and forth to work. And labor is working, really closely with our Department of Transportation colleagues to make sure that that money will go to where it needs to go, particularly disadvantaged communities where we know that there's a need. So I think that's one way that we really are thinking about that in the immediate term with the Build Back Better agenda. We are investing in care economy, we're investing in workers, we're investing in infrastructure like transportation. So I think that's one. And then your follow-up question was, how do we make sure that this is money that actually like invests long-term? I think we have got probably a really passionate, effective group of advocates and stakeholders here who can raise their voice and make sure it is heard. I think it is hard to think that we will get the transformational long-term investments we need without us like demanding that it be so. We now have had, the past year and a half of like really in your face evidence, but even before that, a generation of evidence that shows that these are the investments we need to have a worker-centered economy that works for everyone. And I think now is really the time to say that we can't go back to normal. It wasn't working for millions of people even before the pandemic, and it definitely hasn't been working for most people over the past year and a half. And so I think now is the time. I think there's a strategy, and like I love the fact that there's an inside and outside game. Like we would not have just what we've done so far without the work of advocates and policy leaders and policy wonks and think tanks who are pushing to make sure that these are the things that we do. And so I think now is the time to just keep at it. I mean, as much as folks have been doing to make sure that we, continue to raise the alarm that we just cannot go back to normal. And I think if we can do, some really good investments that make a difference in people's lives, it is going to be hard to take that back. It is going to be hard to have a system where, we have more paid leave, we have more childcare workers who are making livable wages, and then to say, oh, never mind, we're actually just going to go back to, I don't think people are gonna stand for that. Something that's making me, really excited over the past several weeks is workers saying, on a bunch of different issues, we're not going back to the way things were before. It wasn't working for us during the pandemic, and it wasn't working before, and so we're demanding more. And I think that that's the case on a range of issues, not just on what folks are striking over in terms of like the Striketober strikes, but I think it's particularly in terms of care. We cannot go back to a system where families are spending 40, 50, 60% of their income on care. They don't have leave to take care of themselves or their loved ones if someone gets sick. And so I think now is just the time to keep raising that alarm and just demanding that we do something else.
Thank you. There are so many advocates on this call today, so it's great for them.
Salute to the advocates. We owe the advocates so much. We have, and we will continue to do so.
So what do you make of states like Michigan being reluctant to spend federal COVID stimulus money because of that possibly they'll receive more money better suited for projects in the federal plan, in the federal infrastructure bills?
Oh, that is a good question. I'm not really sure. Is that what Michigan is doing? Is it terrible?
Well, there are some legislators that want to do that.
Yeah.
And, our political environment can be somewhat contentious. And, because of the different seats of power in our legislature and with our governor.
Right. I mean, I think that there are some immediate concerns right now. Like if folks have money to spend to meet the needs of workers and families and communities that need them right now, I think we should do that. And I think it also makes a case to say, we got some money, we spent it well. Here's the people we helped. Here's how much people really enjoyed it. Here's how much economic hardship we were able to address, and then make the case for more. I don't see those as being an either or. I think there's so much. I mean, we are not fully recovered from the pandemic that is currently still happening. So there is an immediate need to help folks where they are right now. And then I think that just makes the case that we should keep doing it. And that's necessary, right? Like, I think we can change the idea of what is like needed. What's needed, we don't just need childcare during a pandemic. We need childcare all of the time. And so I think now is really a time to be making the case and proving that, with federal resource funds, with the priorities that folks have laid out, like it's not just to meet the moment. It's to set us up for long-term structural transformational change that really does change how the economy works for working people.
Thank you. We're just waiting for a couple more questions. Here's another one. Considering the disparate Black unemployment rate and the few families TANF currently reaches due to administrative barriers, how could the TANF program be changed and strengthened at the federal level to fund further access and equity?
Oh, this is a good question. I am probably not the best person to answer this specific question. I think, we're working very closely with some of our colleagues at USDA to think about this issue. But I think, this is kind of an example of, what we're doing with the equity, President Biden's executive order on racial disparities. And I think this is another one where you can take a specific program and think about, do we have all the data? Do we have all the evidence we need? And how do we make sure that we are centering folks? How do we expand the pool of folks who are eligible? How do we make sure that we have enough resources in, states and communities where folks, have the ability to ask questions and figure out if they're eligible more than like 9 to 5? Something that, we looked at not with TANF, but with our wage and hour division is, we have an office that's really only open to take complaints between 9 and 5. I have tons of family who are home health aides who work in fast food. They are not available to come and sit in an office for 45 minutes between 9 and 5. They have other things to do. And so, expanding the hours of access, making sure that folks with disability can access, making sure that we have other languages that are available. I think all of these are kind of, probably not the only things, but definitely a start on the things that we can do. And I know that our colleagues, particularly this audience probably does know Benga Ajilori at USDA, who's heading up an equity commission to think about how programs, including TANF, are going to be more equitable and have more access. And I think, also, just giving folks more resources. I think we, particularly in the past 4 years, maybe we did not do as much outreach and listening to communities, particularly communities of color. And so I think that there really is kind of a responsibility for all of us to be thinking about how we can, take the knowledge and expertise that is in the field. Just folks have continued to work on this through Republican and Democratic administrations, and thinking about, how do we bring in the good ideas that folks have? Because I would imagine, probably the person who asked this question has ideas about what we could be doing. And it's just making sure that we really are engaging stakeholders and affected communities so that we're providing solutions that actually meet what they want.
Thank you for that. At the League, community of voice is so important to how we look at our policy recommendations as well. So businesses continue to report labor shortages. Is there any truth to their claims?
Boy, I thought we were going to make it. I thought we were going to go the whole time and not talk about labor shortages. Oh, next I'm guessing is supply chain. I'm just going to guess the next is supply chain. Labor shortages. As a brilliant colleague who had this job and is now the president of EPI, always says it is not a labor shortage, it is a good job shortage. And so I think that is what we are seeing. I think that there really are just like a number of factors. I mean, as I've mentioned before, there is still a pandemic that is taking hundreds of lives a day. And so I think it matters to folks who have to show up and enforce mask mandates when customers are yelling at them or spitting on them or they're being harmed by actual folks. So I think that, one is the pandemic. I think, we've talked about this a lot, one is childcare. When you have schools that are shutting down all of the time and you don't know if you have somewhere to send your kids, when childcare is 60% of your income, like these are things that will keep you from being able to show up as you need to. We're also seeing that wages, I mean, one way to increase maybe who you can hire is definitely thinking about increasing wages. For a generation, we saw low wage workers, experiencing wage stagnation with few benefits, with lack of worker protections. And I think it's completely fair for after, a year and a half where we have seen just a truly unbelievable amount of sickness and death in this country to ask workers to go back to a job that pays $7.25 an hour with no benefits and an inflexible schedule. I think that is asking too much for workers. I think workers deserve more, particularly the essential workers who have made sure that the economy has kept running. And so I think that there are, a number, I'm not going to say no truth to claims because I am, I'm not going to say that, but I'm going to say that there are a lot of reasons why some workers are choosing not to do terrible jobs for terrible pay. And I can't fault them for that.
I would agree. Can you provide some insight into the measurements that will be used in the assessment of whether equity efforts are working?
That is a great question. So I think something that we are thinking about now is like, how do we make sure that all of the work that we have been doing over the past 200 and something days actually leads to the outcomes that we want? And so we have set up inside DOL a working group of folks across all of the agencies of the Department of Labor with, career and non-career staff across all the different levels of leadership to think about how do we make sure that we really do what we want to do. And so this means, making sure that we have a point person, making sure that we have resources that are available. Folks are doing a lot of great work. And what we're asking them to do is add on the assessment of equity to the work that you're already doing. And so I think that's going to be part of the plan. We have until exactly 1 year. So we have until January 20th, 2022 to have our final equity plans delivered to the White House and say, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And this is the timeline. And I think right now we're thinking about what that means. Something that we have done and will continue to do is ask stakeholders, like, what does it mean for UI to be more equitable? Like, what does it mean for wage and hour violations to actually have decreased in a way that is equitable? What does it mean to reach rural communities with wage and hour enforcement? What does it mean to have OSHA do health and safety inspections in industries and occupations in areas where they don't usually show? So I think, that is one area where we are thinking about how to do that, but also an area where we are making sure to ask other folks. And so I think, we will pay attention to, we're setting out some internal benchmarks for ourselves. We're making sure that we have staff who are accountable to making sure this happens. We're dedicating internal resources. And then I think we're just going to have, a ton of conversations with our colleagues outside of DOL and the government and not. Because I think, one of the things that's come up for us is, for some folks, it's not like I want to talk to wage and hour because like my tipped wages are being taken. I'm experiencing wage theft. I want to talk to HUD about my rental unit. And then I want to talk to USDA about Tanf or I want to talk to Health and Human Services about something else. Folks are saying like, I want to talk to the government about the ways that it is not doing what it needs to do for me and my family, my community. So also making sure that, as a governmental unit, like it's an interagency effort, we are being accountable to all of these things. So long answer to say, like, we are currently thinking about how to do that, how to make sure it really does stick. I think, to the question that was asked a little bit earlier about making sure that, this is a long-term investment, what we want to do is really change the way fundamentally that the Department of Labor works and thinks about equity. And so making sure that like we know it's working and it's not having unintended harm and consequences is something that, you know, it would be false for me to say like we have got that nailed down, because I think that is just a long, thoughtful process with lots of people we have to talk to. But yeah, definitely something that, you know, I'm happy that people continue to ask us, because we should continue to think about it. And we're working on it. I'm sure, you know, some of the advocates and policy folks on this call will get an email from the Department of Labor to ask to join a listening session just to think about that.
That'd be great. I think you'd have a lot of people participating.
Great.
So how can we make sure Build Back Better passes? It's frustrating that it seems to be held up at the risk of having important parts eliminated, that a lot of advocates, you know, that are listening in today care about. You know, what part should we be focusing on to make sure that it not only passes, but best supports a more equitable outcomes?
That is a great question that I absolutely cannot answer. There are lots of new rules I have learned about my particular position. And one of them is that I actually cannot answer. But if someone has the answer, they should feel free to send that in the chat, to send it to your representative, to send it to Congress, send it to the White House, send it to the Department of Labor. But I absolutely, absolutely cannot answer. I can't believe someone's trying to get me in trouble on this call.
Fair enough. We don't want to get you into any trouble. No problem. So, you know, you've touched a lot on systems change. You talked about, you know, UI, for example. Where else do you see the need for greater systems change in order to tackle, you know, equity and more access for all people in this country that don't have that now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think there's two parts. I think one part of my job here is really to tell the narrative of how the economy works and what it means when it's working and when it's not working. And I think that's one thing that's, you know, really important, is the story we're telling about the economy. And I think we have, you know, absolutely nothing good has happened in the past 18 months. One thing that has happened alongside all of the terrible is we now have a larger audience of folks who are thinking, wait, is the economy working for me? Does it matter when the stock market is doing well if I actually do not get a raise? Is my retirement secure? What happens if I get hurt and can't come to work? Do I have any leave to take care of myself or my family? So I think one part is really expanding kind of the conversation and the ideas around what it means to have an economy and a society that works for people, that makes sense, that makes people, you know, not afraid that one accident, one transmission problem will, you know, slide them into poverty because their income and their economic stability is so insecure. So I think that's one, is really thinking about the scale of what's possible. And I think when we can expand what's possible, we now have, you know, care as infrastructure. We now have an economy where we're thinking about what it means for care workers and why it's important that we take care of them, because they are literally taking care of us. So I think one, and, you know, like, I am obviously not the only one doing this work. Like, this is the work of advocates and grassroots organizers who are making sure that the conversation includes as many people, particularly those who are usually not centered, folks with disabilities, LGBTQ folks in rural areas, immigrants, disabled. I mean, all of that, I think, is so crucial to how we think about what is possible and what we want to do. And then I think on the other side is, you know, thinking about, and this is why I spent a little bit of time on our regulatory agenda, is thinking about, you know, the rules and the groundwork that we lay for workers and working people to make sure that they do have some basic protections that keep them healthy and safe, and some level of economic stability. And so, you know, I think UI is one, but we really do try to think about the totality of what workers need. You know, they need a good job, they need living wages, they need protections. If they get hurt, they need help. If they, you know, if for some reason they lose their job, they need unemployment insurance. When they retire, they should be able to retire and like live in dignity and comfort. So I think that there's, you know, and I think one thing that I knew about Department of Labor, but like am consistently just like surprised and shocked and inspired by, is the number of regulations and laws that make up what Department of Labor does. And it is making sure that workers have these bare bone protections that they need. So I think that that's one, is making sure that those are as strong and inclusive and as equitable as possible, while pairing that with, the conversation and the idea of what is possible outside of that.
Thank you. Another question, what can the Department of Labor do about gender-based wage discrimination?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think this is one where, again, we are leaning on the evidence, not just the evidence and data, not just that we have, but also that, great folks like Michigan League for Public Policy, Policy Matters Ohio, EPI, all sorts of folks are doing really, really good work on the evidence of gender-based wage discrimination. And we know we have investigators in our wage and hour division who are making sure that this is something that we're thinking about. We're doing a lot of conversation, particularly with the Women's Bureau, which is led by phenomenal policy and advocate person that you all know, Wendy Chun-Hoon, who's working with the White House on a gender policy initiative. I think it might have come out maybe last week, where the Gender Policy Council is thinking about, what are the different routes that we can do this? Came out on Friday, I'm being told. What are the routes we can take this? What can we do internally to DOL in terms of rules and regulation? What can we do in terms, what kind of legislation could we maybe do? And then a little bit of this, how can we be working with not just employers, but employees and employers to implement some best practices around how we do this. So I think, we are thinking about it across the spectrum. And I think the report from Friday on the Gender Policy Council really lays out some specific ways that DOL is thinking about this. But yeah, this is one where we are definitely thinking about, how to solve this and what this means, particularly, again, the past year and a half was, I don't think people are saying it anymore, but there was some conversation around like a she session. And we know that women's employment and income is still not recovered to what it was. And so we are thinking about, how, again, we cannot have an inclusive recovery if it means, bringing back women to making just like 85% of what men make. Now is the time to really be thinking about what are some of the things we put in place to bring women back to work and bring them back to work with actual equal pay.
So Janelle, unfortunately, we've run out of time. You have been amazing. We really appreciate your insights and your remarks.
Thank you. This was fun.
This was so meaningful to all of us here in Michigan, and you being an Ohioan, you're very close to us in terms of Midwest values.
Yes.
So I want to thank you. Thank you again, and thank Egan and your staff. He was wonderful. We are now going to have a 10-minute break for folks. We're going to come back, and we're now going to take a lot of what you talked about and use our state frame. We've got a wonderful panel, group of panelists to kind of localize a lot of this. So, Janelle, thank you. And I'm so glad that it turned out that we did this virtually, because it's pouring rain all over Michigan, and it would have been really messy for people to travel to Lansing.
Love that Midwest weather. Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun. I'm so honored to have been invited. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I want to welcome everybody back. Janelle was amazing. Thank you for joining us to hear her keynote. And we have an amazing panel discussion that will be beginning shortly. I'd like to introduce Sheila Clay. Sheila will be the moderator, and Sheila is one of our amazing board members. Sheila, thank you for joining us. I'll let you take over right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilda. And I want to start by saying thank you for inviting me to serve in this role. And really want to also join you in thanking Janelle for a wonderful presentation for us, thought-provoking. And also, I can't be remiss in thanking Laura Ross for making sure all of us had everything together to do this today. Today's panel features a dynamic group of community, public health, and policy leaders in our state. They will discuss ways to advance racial equity, strengthen the social justice work going on in Michigan, and explore policy solutions that will improve outcomes for kids and families. So they'll be building on Janelle's conversation, but really specific to our state. Let me introduce our panelists. First, we have Meredith Kennedy. Meredith is a mom, a small business owner, and a tribal citizen from Northern Michigan. She serves on the Think Babies Michigan Executive Board. Thank you for being here, Meredith.
Annie, thank you for having me.
Our next panelist is Madiha Tariq, who is Deputy Director at the Access Community Health and Research Center, where she oversees health promotion and disease prevention programs. Welcome, Madiha.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. And our final panelist is no other than Ms. Kim Trent, who is the Deputy Director for Prosperity at the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, commonly known as LEO. She's the key staffer for the Michigan Poverty Task Force and serves as the Equity and Inclusion Officer of LEO. We look forward to hearing what you have to say today, Kim.
Thank you so much, Sheila. It's always a pleasure to be with MLPP and also with you.
All right. I'm going to have each of the panelists give like a 2 to 4 minute introduction of themselves and also a quick overview of their work, and then also a reaction to Janelle Jones' keynote. And we're going to start with Meredith. So Meredith, just an overview of your work and your reaction to Janelle's presentation.
So first, I want to say Ani Boju and Ani to all of my Indigenous relatives. We are here today at the table. So some of the work I do, I would like to say I'm a systems agitator. I believe in systems change, and that starts with having people like me present, people who are in the community, people who have used these systems, people who are currently in these systems that Janelle was talking about to get economic recovery. I am within my Waganexing-Odawak community, which is Little Traverse Bay Band. I've been in other communities all last week with some of my other tribal communities. And I also sit with lots of parents with the Think Babies Michigan. And so I talk to a lot of parents with 0 to 3 or 0 to 5. So a lot of things that Janelle really resonated with me. Hearing about how we don't have childcare. That is huge in our communities, and it is a barrier to getting back for especially women to be working. One thing that I wanted to build off is just thinking when she said systems change, we need to do this better. There's no better way to do this than to actually talk to the people who are being directly affected, like myself, like my peers, like other family members, and not forgetting that in some communities, we don't even have just COVID. We also have a pandemic of racism, and we also still have the opioid pandemic. So looking at in some of our communities where it's not necessarily parents raising children, it's grandparents, it's aunts, it's uncles. What are we doing to really address that? And address that with technology. What people forget is I always like to tell people something happens above Bay City and we're known as the Bermuda Triangle. We get lost in some of these things, and that's because we don't have good rural internet access. And so when you don't allow a paper form and you are having people do everything via online, some of us don't have the internet access to do that. And furthermore, some of us have a technology divide to do so.
Wow. Thank you, Meredith, for those wonderful comments and help people understand who you are and what you're bringing to this conversation. Madiha, could you also do the same, provide a quick overview of your work and your reaction to Janelle?
Sure. So my background is in public health. And, I think this pandemic has shown that when you politicize public health, there are really huge consequences, literally on the lives of people. So I work for Access, the Arab Community Center for Economic and Social Services, and we are a unique organization that we have a clinic, we have mental health, we serve clients directly through Health and Human Services, but we are also very, very engaged in advocacy. And it is for the very reason that when you politicize public health, there has to be advocates that can fight that can make sure that people are getting the support that they need. I think with the keynote, that was really, really great to hear that our federal government is really thinking about embedding equity in many different ways. I also appreciated her talking about, specifically about how immigrants are impacted, because a lot of the individuals that we serve are immigrants or new Americans that have come here as either as refugees or immigrants or are still in a limbo, trying to figure out their immigration status in the country. So some of the things she talked about specifically that impact immigrant communities, immigrants being forced to become contractors so they can't enjoy the full benefits as employees. Oftentimes employees holding people hostage because they are sponsoring. So that also creates a lot of inequities. I really appreciated hearing that. The one thing that I will say, Build Back Better plan will obviously help a lot of younger communities, help build an infrastructure for childcare, and help create a better infrastructure for new Americans as well as everybody else. However, if this passes, even if it's in its full form, that is not the happy ending of the movie, right? That's actually only the beginning, because our communities have been impacted for years, getting, chilling effects from things like public charge, discrimination, negative rhetoric that has scared people. It has burned people. And they are always looking for the fine print. They're asking, okay, this service is for us, but what's the fine print, right? So the big thing, and I think that Janelle mentioned this briefly, the big thing moving forward is finding ways to build trust, finding ways for the states to be held accountable. And there was a question about states being held accountable. And the number one thing to do is work with community organizations, work with the grass tips and the grassroots, right? That can actually help make sure that states are implementing the benefits in an equitable manner. So I'm really glad to see and hear positive conversations coming from federal government, but I also don't want to, pop the champagne bottle just yet. I think we really need to, talk about how we're going to build trust and and let these benefits be reached by the people who are hard to reach.
Thank you. You raised a lot of good concepts and concerns that I know people in this conference have been experiencing and fighting for. Kim Trent, who represents state government. So we'd love to hear your overview of what you do, so people really understand the role you play in state government, and then your reaction to Janelle.
Thank you, Sheila, so much. I want to first just start by thanking Gilda for inviting me, and thank her for her, many years of consistent and intelligent leadership of the League. and just hope that she will be more successful at retirement than Sheila has been, because Sheila has had a hard time actually retiring. So even though she has earned her rest, we expect to see her continue to work, and we're all the better for it. And I know that Gilda will continue to do so as well. Speaking of the work, I am the Deputy Director for Prosperity for the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. And one of my chief responsibilities is serving as the key staffer to the Michigan Poverty Task Force. So, one of the things that I thought was really interesting that Janelle Jones said was that when people come to government, they don't care which department they're coming to. They're not saying, I need to go to this department for this kind of help and this. They just want the government to be responsive to them. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was one of the really great innovations that Governor Whitmer created when she put together the Poverty Task Force, because it's really designed to leverage the brain power of 14 state department directors to build kind of interdepartmental, multidisciplinary responses to poverty, so that we are doing it in state government. We cannot just think that poverty is the work of the Department of Health and Human Services and maybe a touch of Leo and that's it. Every state department can do something and should be working. So we know when we talk about strategies to help justice-involved citizens, MDOC has to be at the table, and the state police, needs to be at the table. When we're talking about housing, Michigan needs to be at the table. There's so many different dimensions that have to be considered, and so I'm really very excited about the work of the task force and really understanding that we are actually quite excited about what we've seen at the federal level. Some of the things that were talked about in the speech earlier, how important it is that, we have seen in the last year really groundbreaking developments, such as the child tax credit, which we know is has been advertised as being something that's temporary, that we hope will actually become permanent. There is so much research that has shown that cash transfers, although they have gotten a bad name because of words like welfare queens and all these things, all of this entire category of rhetoric that was created to try to vilify poor people over the years. But we know that cash transfers have been tremendously successful in help. In fact, a lot of research shows that instead of making people less likely to work, it actually, and a lot of times, makes it more easy for people to work. If you're able to pay to have transportation to get to work, pay for your children to be cared for well, it's easier for you to have a career. It's easier for you to maybe perhaps go back and get training. So in our approach to poverty here in the state of Michigan, we have kind of long-term strategies and short-term strategies. Obviously, we're trying to fix some of the short-term flaws that we have, such as how we our distribution of Tanf, which is really horrible. Here in the state, we're spending about 19% of our TANF dollars on core uses, those things that are necessary to help people who are struggling. If you just look at some of our neighbors, she's back. We are, if people are mentioning Pennsylvania, 65%. No one, the average for the United States is 52%. And here we are in Michigan for our core spending for TANF at 19%. It really is quite shameful. So we are working. The one thing that I do have a little hope about is I think that COVID-19 and what has happened with our economy has really laid bare for a lot of people who have misconceptions about the nature of poverty, about how poor people live and want to live, have seen that when people have cash transfers, in fact, we've seen in the Black community, actually there's been an expansion of entrepreneurship. A lot of people are owing that to those cash payments that we got in the early days of the COVID crisis. So I think that this is a really exciting time to be in government. I am excited about the things that are happening at the federal level. I think that here in the state of Michigan, for example, Governor Whitmer, even before COVID happened, had already expanded or had already changed the asset limit to receive benefits. That happened before. People forget that was actually before COVID. So we're moving in the right direction. I'm very excited that in some cases, there seems to be bipartisan support. I mean, that's the other thing that where I'm feeling more heartened than I have in the past. I mean, we're starting to see things like the benefits cliff. People recognize it has to be addressed. And something that I have my fingers crossed and I'm hoping we might be able to get done soon is expansion of the earned income tax credit. Yeah. At one point it enjoyed incredible bipartisan support. I think we're moving back in that direction. Knock wood, and I'm hoping that over the next year, I'm starting to see a lot of momentum outside of state government, and I'm thinking we might see some meaningful action in state government. So I'm really excited about that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Let me explain to the audience what we're going to do. I'm going to ask a couple of questions of each of the panelists, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. And I want to tell the panelists, if you would like to respond to a question I may have asked one of the other panelists, feel free to answer that when they're finished. I'm going to start with Meredith. Meredith, what are you hearing from community members as the biggest needs right now?
In Northern Michigan,
yes.
Childcare, housing and transportation. I live in a place where we say view of the bay for half the pay. And that's if you're lucky and you have a 4-year degree or work in hospitality or in healthcare, because those are our 2 largest employers right now. So childcare, we have such a need for childcare and we have very few providers. And if we look at why that is, it's because we don't value providers monetarily. A lot of providers go into that work because they love children. They should be compensated, because I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not replacing any of them and I'm giving them to someone I trust. So if we really think about that, childcare, housing, in the community that I live in, one of the major places that you can get a job. However, we have very, very limited jobs there in the surrounding community and very, very limited amount of housing. And so if you are going to work in Petoskey, you most likely live, if you are working one of these essential jobs, getting paid and I'm going to say not even a living wage, because I think we should have a thriving wage, because all poor families live properly. Let's not get that messed up. That you actually have to drive about 20 miles before you can find housing. And if we think about that, that's a transportation barrier, because we live in rural Michigan. We do not have public transport. We do not have Uber. We do not have Lyft. We do not have those where I live. And then on top of that, you have this where you have no childcare. And then if you do find childcare, it's costing you $200 a week. And if I'm making $10 an hour and only bringing home $400, you cannot afford it. And then we get stuck in these cycles with systems that interact with each other, like Head Start. I'll give a prime example. We have 2 Head Starts in our community. However, we do not have after or before care or Friday care. So if I am a parent, a single mother, and I am taking one of my children to Head Start, which is 20 miles away in Pellston, by the way, and I don't have a bus system for that child to get there, that means that I have to drive my child to Head Start. And let's think about who Head Start serves. That means I can work maybe 6 hours a day, 4 days a week. How am I going to serve if I don't have childcare? So those are the things I'm hearing, that we need better childcare. We need a system like the tri-share model in my community, where the employers can help pay for that, because then it will not be a barrier to employment as if we actually have childcare. Myself, I left the workforce and started my own thing during COVID. Why? I didn't have childcare. Where was I going to take my tiny brother? I had no place to take him. This is very, very common in our communities.
You started when you mentioned one program, so which leads into my second question for you in terms of what's worked so far and what can we continue to advocate for in terms of recovery?
So the biggest thing that I've heard so far as a fear is if they take away my child tax credit, because that's what's helping me pay for childcare. The other thing that I've heard is that's helping me keep current on my childcare so I don't lose my slot. Also, that helps me pay for my car insurance so I'm not riding dirty. And it also helps it so I can get a car that is safe for my children to drive in, which means that when you have that tax credit and you have 2 children, you might be able to actually have a car payment. So you can have a reliable car now and not have to have that old hoopty where the tires are bald and it's fearful when we're in northern Michigan winters. And so having that, that's what I hear all the time is don't take away my child tax credit because I'm using it to pay for my child care and to pay for a good ride so I can get to work because now I have child care.
You mentioned drive dirty. I know what that means. I just want you to explain to make sure everybody in the conference knows what that means. I know what that means.
So driving dirty in my community, it means that you are not driving with your plates valid, your registration valid, or your insurance up to date because you can't afford it. And what happens is you get stuck in this cycle. If you're pulled over, you get into an accident, you go right back into a cycle of having maybe a $5,000 debt because you weren't, and then you got ticketed, which means then you get into the cycle of getting your driver's license removed. And these are everyday things that people in my community face because we don't have a thriving wage, because our housing is so far away from where we work, and transportation is the burden of the individual.
Okay. Thank you so much, Meredith, for sharing so people have a perspective, because a lot of people are in urban areas but need to understand what it feels like to be up in the top part of our hand. Thank you very much. Madiha, COVID has shined a spotlight on health disparities that have been in existence for a long time. So they weren't created because of COVID. They've been here for a long time. How do we address health disparities coming out of COVID?
So, COVID obviously exposed a lot of the disparities that my sister Meredith over here has talked about. It's very similar for immigrant communities of color that live in the lower part of our state as well. One thing that I think it was very unique for our community was the political impacts, the political determinants of health that impact our community. A significant number of the people that we serve through Access came here as refugees. And when the shutdown happened, it was a very triggering moment for many people, because when you leave your country in a war-torn situation, there's a shutdown first, right? So the last thing that they experienced that was like the turning point in their homes was the shutdown. The shutdown happened, the war happened, and then they never saw their home again. And then they come to this country, and they have these images of what hope is going to look like. And yes, like they are welcomed by some communities, but there's still negative political rhetoric, limited resources. For example, like Afghani refugees are arriving in the United States. We have about 14,000 people that are in military camps, but we don't really have a real respectable status for them. They come in here as on humanitarian parole, so they're not able to take advantage of benefits. So, these kind of things are additional things that are our community carries. But I think I don't want to, talk only about the negative things. I think it's really important for us to also think about the positive things that we really need to build on. In the spirit of optimism, I'm going to tell you a little story, right? So COVID was the first time I think we saw a glimmer of like basic human rights being provided to everyone. And that happened with the COVID testing, right? So Access was very deeply involved in COVID testing. We did community COVID testing. It was open to everyone. You didn't look at people's immigration status. It was free, and we had these drive-through community events. So when more and more people in the community started finding out that they're not looking at anything, it's all free. We started getting people that had never ever walked through the doors of a medical facility because they had some immigration, status issues, or they're undocumented, uninsured, whatever it may be. And by four walls, I mean it was an outdoor drive-through facility. So I guess they didn't walk through the walls, but they were in the space. We had this woman that came in. Oh, and then I forgot to mention one more thing. We didn't have staff that like specialize in drive-through testing, so we actually I spent my summer spinning blood. I have no training in that, but in the back of a van, it was very interesting. We had staff members that worked in our programs that basically joined the COVID testing team. And so this lady comes in, and she pulls in because she had heard about it being open to everyone, and her intake specialist was somebody from our team. So they're doing the intake, just like you have to get their phone numbers or whatever so they can get the tests. And then the lady asked her, oh, what do you do at Access? And she's like, oh, I work in breast and cervical cancer prevention. And she said, hey, I've had this lump in my breast, but I haven't gone anywhere because I don't want to I don't have money, like I don't have insurance, and I don't want to like authorities to find me. And she's like, why don't you come to us? So the next day she shows up because we provide it to everyone, right? We provide this care. And she get linked to follow-up care through our partners. And she has cancer, but we caught the cancer early. But not only that, she brings with her her son, who's has special needs, that has not seen anyone because of the immigration status. And what her backstory was that, she came here because she got sponsored on fiancé visa by her husband, and husband left her and didn't complete the paperwork. So she has like so much going on, But because of that COVID testing, she was able to connect with someone and connect to a community. She'd been sitting in isolation. So what would happen if we were to continue this? What would happen if we treated every single person who wanted health or social services with the dignity that they deserve? What would happen if we serve people who are uninsured without having them fill out 3 hours of paperwork, which by the way is a payment too, because their time is money. We always forget that. So it's possible. And actually, by not doing it, we're literally kicking ourselves. We are kicking ourselves as a community. We're kicking Janelle said, creating not just an equitable economy, but also a society. And to do that, I think we need to take this little thing that we did with vaccinations and COVID testing and popcorn it, bring it across, learn from it. So I'll stop there.
No, that was a great story to share. If that had not happened and that cancer had progressed, we would have had a death on our hand. And so I think that's a great example of the issues around healthcare and access to healthcare for everyone who needs it, not based on income, but on need. Madiha, how can data play a role in improving our systems?
So it's interesting you asked that. Data has been a really, really big part of the advocacy work that I do, because the community that I serve, the Arab American community, is not considered a minority by federal agencies. So oftentimes people that are coming through our doors, they don't have a box to check. So they'll be categorized as white. And if you look at reports and data that we have, you'll see that they're very different. They are enjoying life in a very different way than our white community. What happened with COVID is, not having that category really, really impacted our community. So I have been part of a lot of the COVID task forces, and, I'm part of the calls where we're going through weekly numbers. And one thing that I found really interesting was that right at the very beginning, our county was having these calls and putting out numbers of people that had COVID, and our zip code, where my office is 48126, one of the reports said like it was like 45% of the people who were COVID positive in 48126, their race and ethnicity was unknown. So, and I said, unknown means like they're Arab American, right? So, we end up like, what ends up happening, and I kind of followed that along. I was like, okay, what happened with them? What happened with them? And basically, like, the contact tracers, they start calling people, and then they realize that the household that they're calling, they only speak Arabic. So then this contact tracers has to contact another person, right? So it was also like, I think there was a delay, like, these kind of things create delay in like the right resources being put in the right places. Second thing is it also impacts, funding. We have been fighting to get, and I'm going to say even in a non-COVID context, like to get funding to support our community specifically. But because the federal agencies don't recognize us as a minority, it has been so challenging for so many years to get funding through minority health offices. Actually, this is the first, I know Kim had mentioned EITC. This is the first time we have gotten a grant to expand EITC communication in our community that is specifically for Arab Americans from the Office of Minority Health after 10 years of like showing up at these offices. But we shouldn't have to do that. It should have come like as a, assumed, that our community needs this. And then the other thing is like there's a false our community always, when you talk to people, they're like, oh no, COVID is not there's no numbers for COVID. COVID is not a problem that our community has. So it created this false sense of security in our community. They always said, oh no, yeah, COVID, no, that's only African Americans are getting affected by it. Latinx, not us. We're not getting affected by COVID. So there was a lag in even the response of the community because there was no data. And this lack of data continues to impact us now, as we're running vaccine clinics, because we really don't know where, how many people from our community were vaccinated. We ran I'll give you an example. We ran a vaccine clinic in one of our offices that served like 5,000 people. But when you look at the data on the back end, it said like 20 people that were Arab American were vaccinated, which I can tell you, I actually personally know more than 20 Arab Americans that came to that vaccine site. So it's like, it really has so many effects. And people think of data and they're like, no, I don't do research like data. I don't understand that, like take it to like a scientist. But data affects every single thing in our life, and it affects funding. It affects our perceptions. It affects the ability for us to gather our voices so that we can advocate. I really, we continue to be part of conversations with our state partners who, by the way, have been incredibly open to hearing about this, to create space for the MENA data collection. But there's a lot of work to do.
Meredith or Kim, do either one of you want to talk about this subject around data? I know how critical it is, and that's a very serious problem in the Arab community. And I'm assuming that when people didn't have their category on and they chose not to click white, which put them in the unknown. Okay.
That's correct.
Well, so I'm just going to crack a joke, and we're called something else. So, because we typically don't have enough numbers to even be shown as data points. So that's all I have to say about data.
That's extremely serious. Go on, Kim.
Obviously data is very important, but I mean, I think that both of my co-panelists have really brought home how important it is that the people who are shaping how data is both collected and interpreted is also important, because numbers, there's this line that numbers don't lie, but the people who collect the numbers and interpret the numbers, they may not lie, but they certainly have their own interpretation. So I think that we have to, when we talk about the importance of having diversity, we need to have diversity in how data is mined and interpreted too, because there is, we know when we talk about health disparities, part of the reason why we have health disparities is because at one point no one cared what happened to women. Women weren't part of the equation. Women, when you were talking about doing studies, women or people of color, the whatever differences that might exist in how our bodies process different medications or different, it just was not something that the medical establishment was concerned about. So I think that we have to have that approach. I mean, there has been a drive to be more intentional about understanding that those voices have to be at the table. And I think that stretches in every aspect of the work that we do, and including data.
And I just wanted to add this too, that it's not just about collecting data, but it's also about how data goes into. So a quick example I'll give you is the state has a disease surveillance system, MDSS, and they collect data in a certain way. So if different people are collecting demographic information in different ways at different intake forms, when it comes and it doesn't fit the exact categories that the processing system has, all of that data gets aggregated. So you can have a great intention and say, you know what, I heard Madiha speak about including, Arab and Chaldean communities in my demographic form. I'm just going to stick another box in here, which is wonderful. Please go ahead and do that. And I'm, baking virtual brownies to thank you right now. But, but then like we also all collectively need to talk about how MDSS, which by the way I think is up for a renovation if I'm not wrong, right? So I think they're looking to like revamp the system, how that matches and it's consistent across every single place where you collect. So it's like, simple thing I'll tell you, like the age boxes. If it's like 14 to 21 years old, and then like some other person is collecting like 12 to 19 years old.
Right. Yeah.
You can't know which one of the people were like 12 and 13 and which people were like 20 and 21, right? So that's why like consistency is such an important factor here.
I will say, now that you've brought that up too, with the child tax credit, I have had people tell me, right, because it's supposed to go up to age, if you're 5 and at that age, you get the $300, right? And if it's 6 and up, it's $250. Well, what they did was they can put it in the year. So if you had a child born in November and is still 5 for the majority of the year, they're not counting that. So even being able to, with the child tax credit, they're just going by the year and not the month of birth. And so you can have a child born in the last couple quarters of the year and is still 5 for the majority of the year, but not receiving that full tax credit. So even when we think about data in that way, as it affects with the child tax credit.
Critical issue that advocacy needs to be pushed on all levels on this one. Kim Trent, I've got a question for you. How are the Poverty Task Force and administration planning for recovery that centers those most affected by COVID, including women and people of color?
Right. So I think that's a really important question. And, I have to say, I'm very proud of the work that we've done with this administration as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, it's just been so intentional. It's been so far reaching. It's not just within state government, but it's in how we, work with the citizens that we are pledged to serve. So, I mean, just it has manifested in so many important ways, starting with the creation of the Coronavirus Racial Disparities Task Force, which was mentioned earlier on this call, how important it is that we are looking at why at the beginning of this crisis, African Americans especially were so disproportionately affected by COVID-19. The Environmental Justice Task Force really looking at the environment and why these industries that we know poison the water, poison the air, are located in areas where people of color live and work. why that has continued to happen, why we are seeing disproportionate rates of contaminated water and those kind of problems that we're having in our state, that we're having even today in Benton Harbor, why we continue to see those kind of things. We are trying to be intentional, because the first thing you have to do is acknowledge that these disparities exist. And we, in a lot of ways in our country, have been in kind of this constant state of denial. We want to believe that we are the dream that we have for our country. And we have a beautiful dream. It just has not really been the reality for everyone. And I think that I am excited about the opportunities that we have seen, particularly post George Floyd, during COVID, that have kind of laid bare those disparities that exist. And I'm so happy that because of them, some elected officials have found the courage to say, yes, race matters. Yes, gender matters. Yes, we have to have policies that acknowledge that, that try to address how those disparities, some of which have been carried out by the government. It's not just incidental. Government has been a player in those disparities. We have to, if we're going to kind of unwind the damage of that, we have to first acknowledge it. And I think that's an important step. Here in state government, we have mandated implicit bias training for all state employees, all state contractors. The governor has mandated implicit bias training for all health professionals in the state of Michigan, so that we won't have, that we're moving to a time where we don't have health professionals who are less believing of women of color when they say that they have pain, when they say that something is wrong with their pregnancy and they know it, and they just get ignored, those kind of things, so that we, there's not one solution to all of these things. We know it's going to be multidimensional. But, so when we talk about how we come out of this crisis and the I'm sorry, I thought I lost you there for a minute. How we come out of this crisis in a way where we're really centering equity, and I think that Meredith especially said it. I was sitting here snapping my fingers when she talked about childcare and housing, especially. Those are two very important priorities for us, particularly childcare. We know that women have been a lot slower to return to the workforce. And one of the things that I love that was said in the keynote was, that we cannot and should not go back to where we were pre-COVID. That should not be the goal. The goal should not be to go back to poorly paying jobs with no benefits, with inconsistent hours, where, that shouldn't be the goal. The goal should be something better. And I think that we are in a place now where there's a recognition of that. I'm hoping. Certainly in government, there seems to be a recognition that we have to do better. And so, for example, we have a $1.4 billion investment in childcare here in our state to try to expand the number of people who are eligible for assistance, to give support so we can have more quality childcare operations in our state. So, that's a huge investment. And Meredith talked about the Tri-Share program that, that's a program that happens to be in my division, where the Michigan Women's Commission is leading an effort where we have hubs all across the state of Michigan, where employers are working with nonprofit organizations that we're working with to get state funding, so that 1/3 of childcare costs are paid by the parent, 1/3 by the state, and 1/3 by employers. So something where employers are invested in. First of all, it's a benefit that your organization can offer to your employees, to show that you really benefit. You are an employer who really understands the value of having a woman in the workforce. That and I don't want to say, because women and men both are care about their children. So I don't want to frame it as only a women's issue, but we know that it is a women's issue, and we have to be really intentional about ensuring that we have solutions for that. So that is how we're, childcare is one way. Housing, we are really hopeful with these ARP dollars. One of the things that the governor has proposed is a $100 million housing and community development fund that we think can be completely transformational, can totally change the game. Meredith talked about this, and we know it's true. We know in Traverse City, for example, great workforce, who are working particularly in the seasonal times when they're, able to go with the tourists and get great jobs, but they cannot afford to live where they're working. And there's no transportation to get them from where they live to where they work. And so what do you do in a situation like that? And you're not earning enough to maybe have reliable transportation. And then that kind of harkens back to Tanf and harkens back to the support programs that we have and how important it is for us to have the flexibility of having cash transfer programs so that those, hardworking people who want to work, who want to have quality housing, but, one car breakdown away from disaster, away from not being able to go to those jobs that they're being mocked for not going to. I mean, we have to be really strategic about giving them the support that they need so that they can be eligible for jobs of the future, high paying jobs, because we think that the measure of economic success in the state can no longer be just job creation. It has to be good job creation. We want people to have the kind of life where they're able to pay their bills comfortably. And we saw, I think that it's been a great experiment for us with COVID. We saw that when people got these cash transfer benefits, when they were able to get money from the CARES Act, when they were able to get money from, for the child tax credit, all of the stereotypes that people have about people who receive federal benefits, they just did not manifest. People use that money to pay their rent. They use that money. Some of them started jobs. They use that money to really help us stay afloat. And it would, all the lies that people tell about low income people just did not manifest. So I think we should look at that and really rethink in our state where we just have this draconian approach and punitive approach to how TANF is distributed. We really need to rethink that.
You made me think about some of the work that, as you said, I'm not a good person for retiring, but the program that I recently launched for the city of Detroit, the Community Health Corps program, was to help people who had been really impacted by the pandemic, who really were working, wanted to work, and the rug got pulled out from under them. And as I think Janelle, you all talked about, the decision people have to make between taking care of my child or going to work, and those are hard decisions. One of the things that was really important, and I think is still important, is to help employers understand that because you hired me, my barriers did not go away when I started the job. So the challenges that I had with childcare, the challenges I'm going to have with transportation, are still here because I'm working for you, but I have not received a paycheck yet. I just started. And to help employers to become much more sensitive that you've got a good employee, but they're going to need the support right now until they move forward. But you've got a really good employee you need to invest in. And so that is a big hurdle, but it has to happen if we're going to move forward.
You know what, can I just say, Sheila, that's such a really strong point that you just made. And, the University of Michigan Poverty Solutions had an analysis of, the number of barriers that people face with employment and how that affects, employment rates. And so when a person has zero barriers, that 83% of them are employed, about 4.3% are unemployed, and about 12% aren't in the labor force. If you have 3 or more barriers, 15.9%, only 15.9% are employed. And then you have 77.5% who aren't even in the labor force. Right. So, we have to, I think it's part of our job, particularly with the Poverty Task Force, when we're kind of leverage all of this brain power from these 14 state departments. A lot of it is about barrier removal.
Thank you.
We have to really figure out how we can work with the different departments so that we can help people navigate those barriers so that they can have a job, a living, and a life.
Absolutely. And you talked, Kim, earlier about the fact that it's got to cross everything. There's not one department responsible for this. Poverty impacts every aspect of someone's life. And so you cannot centralize it under one department. It will never get solved that way.
Right. Every department's policy definitely impacts whether or not people have the tools that they need to transcend poverty.
Absolutely. Kim, we have a lot, we have a lot of advocates on this call. So how can advocates support the administration to make sure these folks are the focus of recovery efforts?
That's a really great question. I mean, I would just do what you are already doing, which is paying attention. There will be legislation, I think. This next budget, I would say really pay close attention to it. I think that the governor wants to go bold. I think that she wants to, have ideas that are going to be transformational. We have a once in a lifetime opportunity with these ARPA dollars. Some of the initiatives that we want to support, like, really being intentional about helping people who are justice involved, helping them get back into the workforce in a meaningful way, helping nonprofit organizations. I know a lot of people on this in this meeting, run nonprofit organizations. So she's proposed a $50 million fund to help particularly smaller nonprofits that really struggled during COVID-19, and to give them tools so that they can really help, particularly kind of the ALICE population and our low income citizens, really give services to them in a strategic way, in a way that kind of comports with our vision for helping to eliminate poverty in our state. So there are a lot of ways that just paying attention and making your voice heard and staying in touch with your state rep and state senator, because I think we are at a moment where we could have support from the legislature. I think that they're hearing a lot they're starting to from businesses, because it's hurting businesses' bottom line that people are not going back to work. And businesses can do things to change, to make things more amenable for people to return to the workforce, but government also has a role to play in it. And I think that they're trying to get government. I mean, I don't know, they might be a little slower to do the things they need to do, but they're certainly talking to government about what government can do. So that's, I think, a good sign. I think that they recognize, for example, with the benefits cliff, that has been a real impediment for them getting to be able to, promote really talented people on their staff, because people don't want to get more money because they're worried they're going to lose benefits.
Right.
So how do we address that in a meaningful way? How do we the EITC, which is a proven strategy, which so many other states, we are actually kind of an outlier in how little, we have a 6% match for EITC to the federal EITC, which is low. I think there are only 7 states in the country that have less than 10%. And we're one. So we don't want to be one of the few. We want to be in the mainstream of really using that tool to help people have more money in their pocket so that they can be more successful in the workforce, in efforts to try to, one of the things I haven't talked about is a long-term strategy, which is trying to get more Michiganders kind of a post-secondary credential, whether that be a college degree, whether that's a skilled trades apprenticeship. We recognize that these 21st century jobs, a high school diploma it's just not enough. And, I had grandfathers who worked in the plants in the 40s and 50s and 60s who did very well. And their children were able to thrive and have middle-class lifestyles, because at the time, it was a very lucrative industry. We know that times have changed, and we have to change our approach. And so we want to have a state government that's really helping Michiganders get those post-secondary credentials. So we have this goal of 60%, we call it 60 by 30, 60% of Michigan working adults to have a post-secondary credential by the year 2030.
Wonderful. That is absolutely paramount to moving people out of poverty.
Right. And if I can because going back to your first question, Sheila, just really quickly, when you talk about how we're trying to be, really center equity in that. So Futures for Frontliners, I think, is a great example of that. Futures for Frontliners was a program, or is a program, that offers tuition assistance to those men and women who didn't have the luxury of working from home like a lot of us did at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, who were pumping gas, who were working in hospitals, cleaning hospitals, who were stocking our grocery shelves. Life went on. People had to still pick up garbage. People had to still do that kind of work. So it's almost like a GI Bill for those brave Michiganders that gives them free college tuition, to really thank them for being on the front lines of helping our state navigate the early days of the COVID-19 crisis. So those kind of things, trying to be innovative and find Michiganders who we know, want to make more money, want to have more economic stability, giving them the tools to do that in a way. And then this way, we're really thanking them for their service in the early days of the crisis.
That's phenomenal. Repeat the name of that program again, Kim.
It's called Futures for Frontliners.
Okay. All right. We are at the stage now where we're ready to take questions from our audience. If you can see the little banner in front of you, that either email your questions to info@mlpp.org or text your question to 63566 for our panelists. We have our first question. And this is open for any of our panelists to respond to. Are there discussions on changing the approach of how data is collected and used? This is very eye-opening and must change.
I can go first. So, we at Access, we launched a program called the Center for Arab Narratives, and if you're talking about the actual fact that Middle East, North Africa, MENA community is not considered minority, this program was what began to address that. And we are currently in conversations with several different sections of the state, particularly in the health division. Our goal is to start with, talking to COVID, people who are working in COVID, in the area of COVID in the state to bring a category on that's consistent. The other piece also is BRFS, the Behavioral Risk Factor Survey that is taken across the state. The state Michigan is the only state that has done the Arab and Chaldean BRFS survey. They do it every few years. However, a better approach would be to include the category in the regular BRFS, because the way they were collecting data for the Arab and Chaldean BRFS was they were, looking at a last name, surname algorithm, and calling people who seemed to have the last names that were Arab American and saying, can you fill out the survey? In 2016, that did not go too well because people are a little scared when you call the phone and say, hey, I'm calling from the state. But we did pretty good. I do think, though, having the regular BRFS survey have the MENA category is going to be the big change, which is actually happening right now. There's conversations. So keep our fingers crossed. Please contact me if you're interested in joining this movement. We need more advocates.
So I have like a small microcosm of something that happened when I was on a call during COVID, talking about indigenous tobacco use and why it's so disproportionately high. And so my data reflects on why you need to include minorities within the work that you do as Authentic Voice, because I happen to say, well, you do realize that tobacco is called sema in our community and it's sacred. And so if you are asking indigenous people if they are using tobacco, you need to decide if you're asking them if they are using it for sacred purposes or not, because typically people who are practicing in a traditional way light tobacco every morning. So it might be disproportional because of that. So even realizing that at a small local level, because I think that was with with a health equity group. And I was like, well, that data seems a little silly. Did you ask them if they use it for traditional purposes for praying? And so even being able to be in those small spaces during COVID online, because there's no way I would have ever been able to get into my War Pony and transfer down there for that kind of meeting, let alone ever be invited to that pre-COVID, by the way. So even being able to have those authentic community engagement and that authentic community voice sitting in these spaces saying, hey, wait a minute, your data might be off because you don't understand our community.
Yeah.
So I think even with that, those small data changes are things that you could actually do, along with advocating for those who are something else to have a proper line item in the data.
And that gets to our inclusion. They're not, if you don't include me, you don't know. And the cultural awareness of what the data means to you versus what it means to us is so critical. So critical. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Our next question. It seems like rural and urban people are often pitted against each other when it comes to societal issues. Can you talk about how we can address that?
You know what? I'm so glad that question was asked, because I, in my work, I think that if you pay attention at all to poverty in our state, you know, when you ask people what is the poorest county in Michigan, a lot of people would say Wayne County because they think of Detroit or maybe Genesee because they think of Flint. And no, it's rural counties. And you know, I think even among some of our leaders, there's this assumption that poverty is something that happens somewhere else, but it's something that happens everywhere. Even there was a time when I think that we were lulled into this sense that suburbs were just kind of an intentional escape from poverty, but we know that there's poverty in suburban areas too. So I think that what we have an opportunity to do, you know, with this work of the Poverty Task Force and with this kind of newfound, you know, out of necessity, I think there has been a lot more collaboration. I think that we really have an opportunity to build those bridges so that we don't have those divides where people think, you know, it's Southeast Michigan against the rest of the state, or it's Detroit versus everybody, or whatever, you know, kind of versus kind of configuration that people have embraced. I think there's a real opportunity for us to really have one Michigan where we understand that, you know, the problems that we have, the strengths that we have are things that we should all, you know, be invested in trying to, you know, solve our problems, because, you know, a problem like poverty is not a urban problem. It's not just a rural problem. It's one that everyone has experienced. Although not everyone, it doesn't manifest the same way everywhere. And it doesn't, you know, one thing that I think is important that we mentioned earlier was the digital divide.
Mm-hmm.
I know, and Meredith and I, you know, Meredith has talked about this a lot in my short acquaintance with her about the lack of, you know, connectivity in rural areas in Michigan. There are places, there are entire communities that do not have internet service. And I think that people don't recognize that that is a real problem. And I think that we think about it in a city like Detroit where there's not connectivity. I think sometimes we frame it as only a racial issue or only an urban issue, and it's certainly not. It's an issue. And so, you know, again, when we talk about the opportunity to have meaningful change because of these ARPA dollars, you know, we are really trying to have a statewide plan to address, you know, high-speed internet, to address connectivity, to make sure that we're on an even playing field, because we saw last year when everyone had to go home, you know, some kids really just got left behind. And we are just now probably starting to see the results of that kind of lost year.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going to talk about, you know, how politicizing public health is dangerous, right? And I think for me, this simple issue is very simple. This is a divide and conquer situation, right? So we have the urban and rural communities fight. Since it's apple season, I'm going to use that, fighting over one apple where there's a basket of apples lying elsewhere that is being handed out to everyone. So instead of talking about rural and urban communities being pitted against each other, why don't we talk about the government prioritizing ending poverty rather than spending their money elsewhere that is not a priority?
And I will say that I have a very powerful cheer team. They are my hype girls that I've met through Think Babies, who are other parents. And they are from urban areas. I am typically the most northern rural person sitting someplace. This is where I tell all of my advocates, have you reached out to the UP? Because they have the same issues. We're all in the same ocean. We're just on different boats.
Yes.
And so really looking at even one of my really good girlfriends, guess what? She's got problems with connectivity and she lives in Detroit. Same reason that I have problems with connectivity. I couldn't even get internet access until COVID hit because it wasn't offered in my community because no one bothered to flip a switch at the end of the substation. So even looking at that, yes, there is a basket of apples somewhere else. Why aren't we asking how are these apples best used? And that goes to authentic voice, because the same issues that we have, and I don't look at it as being pitted. Poor people recognize poor people.
Yes.
These bean jars right behind me, those are legit. Every poor person has to fill their bean jars. And we recognize that. And there's no way that I would ever say to any of my brothers or my sisters or my relatives living, especially my BIPOC relatives, say that my bean jars are more important than yours. No, we both need our bean jars filled. How do we best do that?
That's right.
What are the services and the monies that need to be reallocated? Instead of having everyone in their Eiffel Towers and advocacy and in the state world, why don't you come and ask us about our bean jars and say, hey, first, before you can even apply online for MI Bridges, do you have internet access? And how can we do that?
Right.
How can we make that affordable for you also? So I don't look at it as being pitted, because the families that I work with, my hype girls from P3 parents, you know who you are, we all are in the same ocean, just on a different boat.
Right. And I think when policies are even designed and developed, and rules and guidelines are placed in, you have to ask yourself, is that a policy or guideline that people can even follow? It's not that they don't want to follow it. Maybe they can't because you've got an online portal and they, like you said, they don't have internet. And so you've created a barrier by the very policy that you just wrote. So all, as you said, we have to look at all the layers of this and the impact it's going to have on everyone. But I think more people need to understand and realize that people across the state, not just, as Kim indicated, Southeast Michigan, is in poverty. It's across our entire state. And the story needs to be told and shared.
And when we talk about technology, realizing that tech divide, the majority of our Alice population, the first time they ever had a computer in their home was because it was sent home with their kid with online learning. And so even understanding how to use that. In my community, I have a grandmother that lives down the street from me. She's got a Cricket flip phone. She is on Social Security disability, raising her 3 granddaughters, and she can't apply for services unless she walks on down here and asks if I have internet today to help her, let alone establish an email address and then upload things to a portal, because she's still working with a $15 Cricket phone because that's what she can afford on her Social Security disability while she's raising her granddaughters. And so understanding the technology divide when you don't allow someone to come in person, let alone the learning modalities that you have just put a barrier to, because if we look at how people read and comprehend the materials that you put out.
Absolutely. Our next question, this is for Kim Trent. What is the biggest obstacle for you in your role and effort to bring all state departments together? How do you address the cultural differences between departments?
Sorry, I turned off my mic for a second because I didn't want to disturb. I was having some noise in the background. So we have, obviously the 14 state directors who are at the table, but then we also have work groups. So our work groups are organized around issues. So issues such as health, safety, and housing. So in that work group, you have people who work for DHHS, you have people who work for MISTA, you have people who, probably who work for the state police, you have people who are in MDOC. So I think that one of the ways that we kind of break down barriers, because there are certain ways, when you say cultural differences, there are certain ways that people do things in their departments. I mean, we try to have uniformity sometimes about, some approaches, but we know that, every department kind of has its own way of doing things. But I think when you organize around issues, it's easier to kind of break down those barriers. And we've really had quite a bit of success of getting and making people really feel like their contribution is valued. That you're not just here for set decoration, that you're really here. We need your expertise. You are bringing something to the table that we need to hear. And, we want you to challenge us, challenge assumptions that we have, because in our part of the world, this is what we've been taught, but you have a bigger, you have a different way of looking at things because you're looking at it from a different perspective. We want that 360 perspective. And so, I think that's, the way that we've been able with the Poverty Task Force, and we're still young. I mean, we've only been around since 2020. And of course, we got kind of a rude awakening. We started in January. I started in January 2020. And then, of course, we all know what happened in March of 2020. So I haven't even really been to Lansing since March of 2020. I think I've been there once. So it's been unusual. I've been, here at home, and that's been a bit of a challenge because, I think sometimes when you're working collaboratively, there's something about being in the same room with people that can be a little bit more powerful, because as much as we like to think we all are looking at the camera and not checking the email and not, taking a call, putting that picture up for a minute, taking a call, stuff happens. So we, there have been those challenges, but I think that people are so committed to the work that we've been, and then also we've had this prism of being able to look through, how the COVID-19 crisis has really kind of laid bare for us a lot of the challenges that we were talking about pre-COVID, but COVID has kind of brought it into sharp focus for us. And I think that also has kind of solidified and helped us work very, very successfully collaboratively with these different kind of cultures that they're bringing to the table. And then this year we introduced actually having external leaders at the table too, because we wanted, the first year we just had state employees at the table, but we, also have brought this year, a limited number of kind of subject experts to the table as well to work with us. And we have found that to be really successful. And don't be surprised if some of you who are on this call, I'm looking at my co-speakers and even the moderator might get a call for our next report, because we really do want to hear, especially, and the things that Meredith has said, I think are so powerful. And that perspective is really not heard enough. So it's, I'm sure I'll be calling her soon to bring her into some of this work.
Wonderful. Next question. What suggestions would you offer to a small nonprofit organization that is interested in rehabbing homes to help with the housing crisis? Where should they start to make the most difference?
So I'm going to take this one and I'm going to say, have you talked to those who might be houseless or who cannot afford their rent first? Have you gotten that authentic voice? Because it's all great to rehab a house, but you have to make sure that you're actually going to be able to put a family who will utilize that in there and have it appropriate for them. One thing that I do on my economic board for my tribe is we are tasked with doing housing for my community. We were surprised to know that when I went to go talk to my housing department for the tribe, for the official government, they said, we actually need singleton homes. We have a lot of people who aren't quite elder status, so they can't get into our homes there, but they are divorcees who don't have children living with them. And so they need homes that are actually 1 bedrooms or studios for that population because it's underserved. And so really looking at your, who are you trying to house and getting their authentic voice to say, is this appropriate? Because if you are thinking that the majority of people in your community, because you've been told, are, families, it might be that it's a single mom with 1 child. And so redoing that 3 bedroom, she won't be able to afford that heat bill. She won't be able to afford that electric bill on her own. And so really asking your community and asking them to come together for authentic voice to make a plan, that's where I think you should start, by making sure you have the population that is going to be able to utilize those homes before you start snatching them up and rehabbing them.
I would also say, and I was actually shocked to hear this, is that Michigan right now, Michigan is undergoing the first statewide housing plan that they've ever done, which I was shocked to hear. And so, part of that process, holders to the table to kind of offer their advice about how we prioritize, obviously affordable housing, as we've spoken about before. I can tell you in the work that I've done with this poverty task force, by far is the number one issue that I hear when I go out and talk to people, by far. And it's in pretty much every segment of the state. I hear about the needs for affordable housing more than, any other thing. And so I would just say, maybe plug into, as you plug into kind of the universe of nonprofit organizations that are already doing the work, your state and local kind of institutions that kind of have their fingers on the pulse of what kind of assistance is coming down, whether from federal government or state government. I think that there will be some opportunities, and I think that it's important that there's a planning process. That's why I said I was, kind of surprised to hear that it had never been a statewide process. But I think that when we talk about having transformational change, that's one way that that's going to manifest is in having a statewide plan and really executing it with some of the ARPA dollars that are coming in.
Just small thing to add is that we have the largest airlift of foreign nationals to the United States that's going to be happening in the next year and a half. In the end, we're going to have about 150,000 Afghani nationals that will be moving to this country. 50,000 of them are already stuck at airports around the world. 14,000 are in military bases. We have a responsibility to give them a decent home, to welcome them as one of our own, because they didn't want to leave. They were made to leave.
And I just want to add too that in the work that I did with the new community health care program for the city of Detroit, housing was the number one issue, whether it was securing housing or having safe and habitable housing. I cannot tell you the number of families we found who were actually living in a structure that was absolutely unsafe for them to live in. And so, and they did not have the funds to fix what was broken. People had no heat, no water, no lights. And it wasn't because the pipes were bad, other things were going on, and no money to fix a home that they actually owned, but was absolutely unsafe to live in anymore. So housing is not just securing new housing, it is helping people live in safe housing so that we don't have fires and tragedies because people can't fix what's wrong.
And being able to pay their taxes on the houses that they own.
Yes.
Because if you live in a community like mine, View of the Bay for half the pay, where the majority of the homes in my community are actually second, third, and fourth homes for those people, my taxes are skyrocket on 600 square feet, by the way, because that's where my family lives. So for me to be able to keep my home is important.
And Sheila, I think also, when we talk about equity, that's why I think it's so important for us to have that lens on the past too, because there's a reason that, a lot of homeowners in Detroit aren't able to pay to have those needed repairs done. They don't have any equity in their homes. And a lot of times they don't have equity in their homes because of things like redlining, because of things like disinvestment, because homes had been devalued for generations. My parents, it really took me becoming an adult to really understand the impact of this. My parents bought a beautiful house that we grew up in Highland Park, Michigan in 1972. And when my parents gave it to my brother, when he started a family, they had moved on. And when my brother went to sell the house, I think they paid about $27,000 for the house in 1972. And when my brother sold it or attempted to sell it, it was worth about $20,000. So it was actually worth less than it was when my parents bought it in 1972. And it wasn't because the house wasn't beautiful, because it's a really nice house with leaded glass and all the accoutrement, but it was in a Black community. And I think that people you cannot erase that from the equation.
Absolutely.
And it's not just a past thing.
No.
We saw in the housing bubble when people were doing those subprime loans, there was certainly a racial element to that too. So it's something that continues, and we have to be really intentional about addressing it.
And that's been a centuries old issue that has caused the racial wealth gap in this country. It's been around housing.
Absolutely, because that's the number one way that people build wealth.
That's right. We are getting close. I don't see another question, and we are getting close to the end of this session. So would you all, the three of you, like to give just final remarks, each of you, and because the Michigan League for Public Policy is about action, so it's really a final remark about a call to action for our audience, who are advocates and also, as you said, nonprofit leaders who who are part of the change that needs to happen. Meredith, would you like to start?
I'm too late for the nose game. Anybody who knows me knows not at first. I would like to say to all the advocates, people in the state departments, everyone listening today, please remember that you are on Indigenous lands. And while you're on Indigenous lands doing this good work, I want you to remember that we have a core set of values. And part of those values are love, respect, honesty, and truth. And so I would ask that your call to action would to be actually include those people who you want to serve, because you may not be serving them right now, that you need to give them authentic voice in the spaces that you are in and to provide a space for them, because that's the only way that you can move forward. Miigwech.
Thank you. Powerful words, Meredith. Thank you. Madiha, I think you're on mute.
Oh my goodness, I promised I wasn't going to do that. So I think definitely in line with what Meredith said, like, including us, taking us off the menu, putting us at the table, and also remembering that so many communities have been excluded for so long. There's a lot of trust to be built. We talked about EITC today. Did you know that Arab American community has a lot of people who qualify, large number that qualify in the Arab American community for EITC don't utilize it because they don't think they qualify. Health insurance, when we started the Navigator program, so many immigrant communities of color did not apply for it because they thought that they don't qualify. It's almost like they have been told that they don't deserve this for so long that they just don't try. So it's building trust. It's us. It's not just offering these amazing policies and new benefits, but also, welcoming people back in, telling them that we're going to take care of them, and then and really fighting things that create further tension, like things like public charge, where you have, pregnant women disenrolling from WIC programs because their husband is overseas and they want to sponsor them and have their green card come in time so they can be here for the birth of their child. We need to stop putting communities of color in this situation where they have to make a choice between their health benefit and their families.
Thank you, Madiha. And our final word from Kim Trent.
For a call to action, I would just say we are at a unique moment in American history. Having gone through, a terrible, tragic, horrific, I unfortunately lost many people to COVID-19, horrible situation, but out of it, we have a unique opportunity to have transformational change that we have not had in the state in a very long time. And I would just say my call to action to you as leaders is do not allow this state to squander this opportunity. These folks who are here in Lansing are here to serve you. So make sure that they are serving you and serving the communities that you serve by not squandering the opportunity that we have to have lasting transformational change. It's not just enough to put things together with bubblegum and shoestring. We need to have a plan and execute a plan and have it be a plan that our grandchildren will see have the fruit of the seeds that we plant today. So I thank you so much for this opportunity, and I know that we're going to go forward and make sure that the state of Michigan and the federal government has done its part. Let's make sure that the state of Michigan does its part too.
Thank you. I really want to thank Meredith, Madiha, and Kim for this awesome panel, for sharing your experiences, your knowledge, and your optimism for the power that we do possess to bring about the change through this opportunity, as you talked about, that we don't squander this. So thank you very much. And thank everyone for the questions. They were thought-provoking and really added to the session today. And now I will turn this back over to our illustrious leader, Gilda Jacobs.
Thank you, Sheila. And I just want to thank you, amazing, amazing women. You are so wise. You are such great leaders. And we just are eternally grateful that you would share your knowledge and passion with everybody today. So thank you, thank you. So speaking of, I don't know whose dog that is, but maybe it needs a walk. You know, speaking of great leaders and people who have made transformational change in our state, brings us to this time in our program where the League presents the Sharon Parks Award, which is an award that was created in honor of our previous president and CEO. Sharon is here in the audience today. You can wave, Sharon. I know that she'll be as thrilled as I am to know that this year's award will go to Donna Marie Brown, CEO of the Michigan Nonprofit Association. And Donna actually will be stepping down from her position at the end of the year as she has relocated with her husband out of state. Donna, if you know her, has been instrumental in promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in the nonprofit sector. Under her leadership, the Michigan Nonprofit Association has been included in important national conversations by developing partnerships with state and national organizations. She is the first woman of color to have led the M&A. She has been a consistent champion for innovation and coalition building. She has shown unwavering commitment to improving opportunities for Michiganders. And as a lifelong native of Detroit, she has invested decades of service to secure justice and opportunity in Southeast Michigan and our state. It is my absolute honor and privilege to present you, my dear friend Donna, with the League's Sharon Parks Award today. Your name will be on a plaque that it's virtual right now, but it's in our office. We have made a contribution to Midnight Golf in your honor, which is an amazing organization, and we understand that that's one of your favorite charities. So Donna, I'm going to turn this over to you for a few remarks.
Thank you so much. I'm so full right now, Gilda. You know me, and so this means so much to me. First, before I make my remarks, I want to say how wonderful this program has been today. I mean, it has been amazing. The speakers, Janelle, Meredith, Madiha, and Kim, were so amazing. And of course, the expert moderator, my mentor and friend, Sheila Clay, just tremendous leadership. So I do have some remarks prepared here that I want to share with you. My friends and family know it was very hard for me to get to sleep last night in anticipation of this very moment. You see, I am deeply honored to have received this award from an organization I deeply respect. For more than 100 years, the Michigan League for Public Policy has been making a difference in the lives of our most vulnerable, those living in poverty, and particularly children. Then to have an award named after a powerhouse such as Sharon Parks gives me perpetual butterflies in my stomach and goosebumps on my arms. Although I've never had the opportunity to work directly with Ms. Parks during her tenure as president and CEO of this wonderful organization, her impact and trailblazing have paved the way for others to serve our most vulnerable with vigor, strength, savvy, and a whole lot of heart. I'm particularly grateful to have the opportunity to receive this prestigious award from my dear friend and my soul sister, Gilda Jacobs. Her leadership has inspired me to always do my best and to know I am supported even when I fall. Thank you for your partnership, and thank you, Gilda, for your friendship for so many years. Thank you to the incredible staff at the Michigan League for Public Policy who are relentless in their work and for their solid partnership with my organization, Michigan Nonprofit Association. Thank you to the Board of Directors of the Michigan League for Public Policy for your courage to be bold in stewarding the important mission of the Michigan League for Public Policy. Also, I would like to give recognition at this moment to thank Gilda Jacobs for your phenomenal leadership, and to congratulate also the incoming president and CEO, my friend Monique Stanton. This is incredibly awesome. Lastly, I accept this award on behalf of the board and staff of Michigan Nonprofit Association and all the leaders, known, unknown, informal, and formal, that do the work every day. My hope is during my time at Michigan Nonprofit Association, I was able to support your work in some way, to support the community in some meaningful way. And in closing, I like to use the words of Sharon Parks. I was able to dig up an article where she wrote in 2010, I believe. She says, "I'm a leaguer for life." You know what? And so am I. I'm a leaguer for life. Thank you so much again from the bottom of my heart. I am so very, very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. I wish you could hear all of us clapping for you. You really are such an inspirational leader. And gosh, I've wanted to cry so many times today, and this is another another time. So thank you. And I want to thank all of the attendees of today's Public Policy Forum on this rainy day. You stayed with us for such an amazing, incredible program of speakers and thought leaders. We're at the League, we just want to encourage people to join our efforts, our advocacy efforts. Please go to our website at www.mlpp.org to learn more ways about how you can engage in policy change with us. Everybody that came today, we're going to follow up with you. We're going to ask you to complete an evaluation of the program. We are very committed to bringing you to the table to take part in creating a vision for Michigan, and we hope that we were successful in doing so today. Thank you to all who sponsored today's event, to all of our speakers, to our staff. Huge shout out to Laura Ross, and to our new talented president and CEO, Monique Stanton. It has been such an honor to serve the Michigan League for Public Policy these last many years. And I thank all of you here today for helping to make Michigan a better place through your advocacy and activism. So thank you, folks. Hopefully we'll see you before next year's public policy program, but thanks for being such an important part of all of our efforts.